what a joy, honestly, to finally have everyone together for this gala. Yeah. We tried to do this, as you know. In 2020, we had everything all planned out, and we went on lockdown. So we postponed it till the fall. Well, you know how that worked out, right? And then we tried again the following year, and we postponed it till the following year. And I don't know what year we're in, but it has taken forever. But oh my goodness, it's just wonderful to see you all. Thank you for joining us this evening. This is just terrific. And I have to thank Sue Ream. Sue Ream, stand up. Oh my goodness. Sue and Linda and Cindy and Ann Batman worked so hard to get this all together. And we, the rest of the board, all of the board, stand up, all of you. Yeah, everybody, give these folks a hand. And we had other league members who helped, who greeted you out there. Marianne and Mickey, you stand up too, because you deserve our applause. Thank you so much. And we are so pleased this evening to have with us 3 of our student elections ambassadors. Ella, Jordan, and Annie, stand up, please. And you may not know, some of you do know, some of you are going to be there actually. They are having a youth town hall with our mayors and other city and town representatives on Sunday at the Civic Center in the Board of Supervisors chambers. And if you know any young people out there who would like to come and really have a wonderful, wonderful time and get to know more about their local governments, please tell them about this. And you can ask the students, you can ask me, you can ask Megan Stone, who should also stand up. And we have some other young people with us this evening. We have from the Youth Transforming Justice, which Don Carney, I believe Don is here too. I know Don is here. Hi, Don. We have Razeline and Sheila. Stand up, Razeline and Sheila. And we have decided that we need, every time we do this, to invite the young people to join us. I think it's just really wonderful to have them here and to see what us grown-ups do. Okay. All right, so I'm going to turn this over to Linda. Okay.
Thank you, and welcome. And my name is Linda Sula, and I'm with the League, of course. And I just, is this better? Oh, yes, it is. Okay. There we go. Oh, well, I'll just do it this way. Anyway, I wanted to thank our sponsors who have hung in there with us for 3.5 years. And every time we extended, you guys extended, and we can't thank you enough for your support, because without you, we just probably wouldn't be here. So we look forward to next year, too. And I want to make mention also a special thank you to 37 Wines for the contribution of their wine at dinner tonight, the accommodations at the Cavallo. Thanks to Cavallo for our guest speaker. And who am I missing? Oh, Baked Blooms. I just want to say a special shout out for the centerpieces that are actually cupcakes that will be your dessert later. So thank you for coming, and I will turn this over to Kate.
Okay. Okay, so well, cupcakes are a hard act to follow. My name is Kei Noguchi, and I'm here speaking on behalf of the Education Foundation Board. Our league's tax-exempt Education Foundation was founded in 1983 and significantly funded in 1996 with a $250,000 gift from the Dorothy Belcher estate. The Foundation's first priority is to cover our league's expenses for voter service activities. Our second priority is to fund educational grants and giving programs. In 2018, the 7-member Foundation Board wanted to increase our giving impact by asking league members and friends to respond to a matching grant. After meeting with representatives from the College of Marin, we decided to fund a new program to provide bus cards to ESL students. We called our campaign A Lift for English Learners. After 2 successful years, the college institutionalized the program. In 2020, we once again met with the College of Marin and were encouraged to provide seed money for a Student Emergency Assistance Fund. This was in the early days of the pandemic shutdown, which created a whole set of problems for students. This is our 4th year of supporting the Student Emergency Assistance Fund. This fund has provided students with laptops and textbooks. It has also been invaluable in meeting students' needs swiftly with a minimum of red tape. That could mean replacing a flat tire, paying for an unexpected medical expense, providing short-term childcare, or meeting any other challenge that jeopardizes a student's ability to get to class. Now, in our 6th year of funding matching grant opportunities, the Foundation Board is profoundly grateful for your continued generosity. Special thanks to those who have already donated, and a special appeal asking others to join us in this effort. Please donate on the League's website or pick up an envelope at the registration table tonight. There is also a glass jar for cash or check donations. Thank you again on behalf of the students who will be helped by your kindness. And now, enjoy your dinners. Thank you.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Cindy Wagner, and I have the honor tonight to introduce our guest speaker, Jennifer Jones Austin, Esquire, who, by the way, flew the whole way from New York City yesterday just to be with us tonight. Jennifer lives in Brooklyn with her husband, Sean Austin, and she has 2 children, a son, Channing, and a daughter, Kennedy. I had the opportunity to meet Jennifer through our mutual really good friend, her husband, Sean, many years ago. And I was privileged to work alongside him in the insurance industry for many, many years. Now, I could stand up here for the next hour or 2 or 3 and talk about Jennifer's background and all of her accomplishments and the many, many awards that she's won. But you really don't want to listen to me talk. You really want to listen to Jennifer. So let me just tell you a little bit about her. Jennifer is a civil rights and social policy advocate and lawyer, an author and talk show host, a nonprofit CEO and executive, and a former government official. A 4th-generation leader of faith and social justice, Jennifer has fought for equity her entire life. She was raised in a family active in the civil rights movement, and her father, the Reverend William Augustus Jones Jr., was a close friend and confidant of Martin Luther King Jr. As CEO and executive director of FPWA, an anti-poverty policy and advocacy organization, With more than 170 member agencies of faith partners, she has led and secured monumental changes in social policy to strengthen and empower the disenfranchised and marginalized. Jennifer brings to her work profound understanding of the link between race, poverty, law, and social policy in America, and the role that religion plays. In addition to being a radio host and a public speaker, Jennifer is the author of Consider It Pure Joy. Just a personal note, it's a great book. And is the editor of God in the Ghetto, a prophetic word revisited. Jennifer has chaired several influential boards and commissions, including the New York City Racial Justice Commission, the first of its kind in the nation, where she led the development and passage by the New York City electorate in 2022 of 3 unprecedented proposals to amend the city's charter to dismantle structural racism and embed racial justice and equity in all government functions. Jennifer also chaired the New York City Board of Correction and presided over the rulemaking process to end solitary confinement in New York City jails. Bravo. She is the vice chair of the board of the National Action Network, where just last week she was honored by being awarded the Wyatt T. Walker Social Justice Award. Jennifer is a founding member of the New York State 400 Years of African American History Commission. She was co-chair of the mayoral transition for Bill de Blasio, the lead advisor for full-day universal pre-kindergarten expansion, and the 2020-2021 New York Police Department Reform and Reinvention Collaborative. She earned I know, I could go on for a couple hours here. And this is, and honest to goodness, this is the mini bio. I spent like days cutting this down. Jennifer earned her JD degree from Fordham University School of Law, a Master's of Science in Management and Policy from the New York University Robert F. Wagner School of Public Service, and a Bachelor of Science from Rutgers University. And when she's not out trying to preserve democracy and equality for all, Jennifer is a walker. She likes fun travel and adventure, dancing, gardening, and spending time with her friends. It gives me a great honor, and would you please join me in welcoming our speaker and my friend, Jennifer Jones Austin.
Oh, she got me good. She got me really good. I'm a little embarrassed right now. I'm a little embarrassed. In part because, when people ask me for my bio, I often think about, okay, well, here it is, and just kind of pick and choose a few things, whatever you want to pull out. And it's like, oh my God, like, can we just stop it? Can we end it? But to the young women in the room, I want you to know that so much of what I've been able to do is because my uncle, Clayton Jones, who was a civil rights attorney, told me when I was graduating from college and I wasn't certain of what I wanted to do or what I wanted to be in life. My uncle told me to go to law school. He said, go to law school, and while you're there, you'll figure it out. And he went on to say, and if you don't, that's okay, because people think that lawyers can do anything short of practicing medicine. And I was a chemistry major, and so it was clear I didn't want to be a doctor. And, he was right. It worked out, and I have been very blessed. I've been very fortunate to do just about anything that I've determined to do, and I'm just very fortunate, very, very fortunate that the calling on my life, I believe, is to work in service of others and to do the work to bring about justice especially for those who've been marginalized, those who've been made vulnerable. So that's really what this is all about. And while I love Cindy and I appreciate her for bringing me here to you and saying, sharing such a, being so generous and sharing so much about me, what I want you all to just know is that I'm an individual who is really blessed to live a life of service, and that's my greatest reward. It doesn't matter what accolades or honors are bestowed upon me. The fact that I get to serve is the greatest reward that one can imagine and one can experience. And I thank you. I really want to take a few seconds to just thank you all. Thank you for being so welcoming, so inviting, for this Northeasterner to come on in here and immediately feel right at home. It's really because every single one of you has just extended yourselves very kind in your greetings. So kind, kinder to me than my New York family is. I have to share that just 2 weeks ago, I was at an event speaking. And at the end of the event, greeting people who were, who'd heard me speak, this gentleman walks up to me. He says, "You had me. You got me." He's like, "I didn't think you were you." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "When we came in, they had this picture of you up on the wall. Like, that must have been 10, 15 years ago?" What do you say? You know what you want to say. I was like, "No, that was 3 or 4 months ago. The picture that you all have." I was like, "What the?" Right? But, I'm a good girl raised in the church, and I just, received it, and I prayed over him, and we kept going. We kept it moving. But really, thank you for welcoming me. It's been great to be on the West Coast. I'm told that I brought the sunshine. I'll claim it. I'll claim it. I tell people all the time, as a person of great faith, I have a direct connection to God. So I'm going to claim it. I'm going to say that I brought it. But, it's just been good. You all have taken the best care of me. I have fallen in love with the site where I've been set up. I don't want to give the name away in case you all don't know, because I want to be able to book it whenever I want to come again. But it's been great to be here and to be in Marin County. I didn't know that you all have heaven on earth, because that is what's happening here in Sausalito. This is heaven on earth, right? Right, Mayor? It really, really is. And I've just appreciated that everywhere I look, the views are breathtaking. There is no bad side, right? It's people taking selfies. Oh, what's my good side? There is no bad side when it comes to this community, and everything has just really taken my breath away, including being here with all of you. Because, it's not often that you find yourself in less familiar spaces where people are just immediately giving and generous. And my breath has been taken away because of what I see outside externally, but what I'm experiencing inside this room as well. That you all have gathered tonight, in part to listen to what is a very relevant, increasingly necessary conversation that is sometimes uncomfortable, takes my breath away. Because it tells me, it encourages me in this fight. It tells me that I'm not in this fight alone. That you're not in this fight alone. We're not in this fight alone. And what is this fight? What is it that we are fighting against? What are we fighting for? The same? More of the same? Something new? Earlier this month, on April 3rd, the eve of the 55th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., I participated in a public discussion at New York University with Reverend Sharpton. The discussion was titled Unfinished Business, Centering Social Justice in Society. And as both the timing of the event and the title suggest, our conversation reflected on the fight to end racism during the Kingian era and the progress made and not made then and in all the years since. Progress, marked or modest or marginal at best, significant or somber or sobering still, transformative or trifling, downright trifling. In the 1960s, a decade after the 1954 Supreme Court decision in Brown versus Board of Education, which ruled state laws establishing racial segregation in public schools unconstitutional, in 1960s, 77% of black children attended majority black schools that were grossly underfunded and inadequate. Today, in 2023, 74% of black students still attend majority non-white schools, and school districts with predominantly students of color receive $23 billion less in funding than predominantly white students in district schools. The passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 prohibited discrimination in public places, but yet, just 10 years ago, George Zimmerman profiled, confronted, and then killed Trayvon Martin simply for walking while black. Just 3 years ago, in 2020, Ahmaud Arbery was gunned down by 3 white men who profiled and confronted him as he jogged on a public street. And just days ago, a 16-year-old boy, Ralph Yarl, was shot in the head. Intending to pick up his younger brothers, he mistakenly went to the wrong address, where an 84-year-old white man who lived there saw him at the door and shot him not once, but twice, because he feared for his life. The 1964 Act was also to protect against employment discrimination at a time when unemployment for blacks was double that of whites. But today, 60 years later, the black worker unemployment rate is just under double, still 1.7 times higher than that for white workers. And wage disparity along racial lines persists. For every dollar that a white person earned in 2022, a black person earned just 81 cents. For black and brown women, the gap was and still is significantly greater. For every dollar a white person earned in 2022, black women earned just 64 cents, and brown women 55 cents. And the wage gap persists even when we have the narrowing of the gap in education attainment. Black women, you may know, are the most educated segment of our society. A higher percentage of black women earn college and graduate degrees than any other group. Black women with bachelor's degrees, however, make 19% less than their white counterparts. On average, a black woman with a bachelor's degree earns less than a white man with a high school diploma only. And she earns, on average, only $1,500 more when she has a graduate degree in hand than a white man with just an associate degree. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed to protect the rights of all, but particularly at that time, black persons whose voting rights were being denied through intimidation and state and county laws sponsored to intentionally restrict their voting rights. But immediately following the law's passage, efforts to undo it commenced, and eventually the law was gutted by the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, in 2013. And since, with no federal legislation to protect the right to vote in place, state efforts to curtail and flat out deny, even erase votes, persist. According to research by the Brennan Center, at least 8 states have enacted 11 restrictive voting laws. But listen to this. At least 408 restrictive laws are being considered, bills are being considered by lawmakers in 39 states, blue and red states. In 2022, 408 restrictive bills were put forward. People look and say, well, you know, we elected a black president, not once, but twice. We have a black and South Asian vice president. Clearly, things have changed. Well, what I submit to you is maybe the reason we're having all of these challenges now to voting is because we saw what that produced when people had the right to vote. The black vote actually means something. That's why they're trying to take it away. Efforts to suppress votes abound. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 was to do away with discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing based on race, religion, national origin, and sex, and subsequently, as amended, physical ability and family status. Yet today, due to both discrimination, continuing discrimination in housing, and continuing discrimination in employment and wages, black persons are largely concentrated or segregated in a small fraction of metropolitan cities in the country. 37% of the entire black population live in just 10% of neighborhoods in just 120 cities around the United States. Homes in neighborhoods where the share of the population is 50% or more black, those homes are valued at roughly half the price as homes in neighborhoods with no black residents. And homes of similar quality, in neighborhoods with similar amenities are worth 23% less in majority black neighborhoods compared to those with very few or no black residents. And all of this, higher unemployment, lower wages, and discrimination in housing, pretty much ensures less upward mobility for black individuals and families. Today, the wealth gap is ever widening, with the median white family having nearly 9 times the wealth of the median black family. I've shared all of this to help you understand why, when at that new NYU gathering that I mentioned a few minutes ago, earlier this month, why when a young woman, a fresh woman, asked, with all that's going on, so many critical issues, what should I be fighting for? Why, when she asked that question, I hesitated to respond. I don't know. Voting rights, economic rights, employment rights, education rights, housing rights, the right to live more freely and move about freely and not be gunned down, the right to privacy, abortion rights, LGBTQIA rights, criminal justice reform, environmental protections, immigration laws, gender equity, racial equity, free speech, and the right to assemble and protest? Heck, choose any one of them. Maybe all of them. And sadly, if they weren't enough, we now have to add democracy, our democracy. For in any one and all of these issues, questions and growing concerns about the meaning and strength of our democracy abound. That government of the people, by the people, for the people. With all that's going on, many who've never had to wonder are now asking, who the people actually are, whose voices and whose votes actually count, actually matter. Claims of voter fraud and efforts to overturn decisive elections by the people when candidates lose. Judges and legislators across this nation, beginning with the highest court in the land, disregarding the will of the people, the desires of the people, when it comes to a woman's right to choose. Legislators slow to act, refusing to act to help ensure safety for the people against military weapons. We're living in a time in the life of this nation where the issues, many of which we've been grappling with since the beginning, the founding of this country, are surfacing what has been our fundamental challenge all along. A democracy for some, but not for all. Let's never forget, we in this room, the League of Women Voters, must never forget that the United States Constitution, when written, excluded all women and persons of color when it came to rights and legal protections. The truth, as hard as it may be to hear, is that since its beginning, America has struggled to be a true democracy. And now it seems we're in a fight to save it. But what are we saving? Just last week, I was at a luncheon and sitting with Martin Luther King III and his wife, Andrea, talking about this very issue. Andrea remarked that their and my children, their daughter and my children, are living today with fewer rights than we as their parents have known. Think about that. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr., in his most often quoted speech at the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, declared, "I have a dream that one day my children will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." And today, his children and his grandchild, me and my children, and many others are still being judged by the color of our skin, and others by their religion, their gender, their sexuality, their nationality and ethnicity, and more. As though of the people, by the people, and for the people still doesn't include us, doesn't include them. 55 years since the assassination of Dr. King, and 60 years since the March on Washington, where hundreds of thousands of people, black and white, and of other races and ethnicities, gathered to demand change, we still haven't overcome racism and the many other isms that have long destabilized and now threaten our very existence. But how? Why not? Why haven't we overcome? With all the strides that have been made, the laws put in place to move us forward, why are we still grappling with racism and biases that threaten us all? The answer is simple. The solution, not so much. But the answer is simple. Because we never changed the foundation upon which our society was built. We live in a society where racism, with sexism a close second, sexism and misogyny, where racism has proven to be the most effective tool for upholding an unjust capitalist system. Now let me be clear before you start turning me off. I'm not denouncing capitalism, but I am asking you to lean in and think about how it has been linked. Capitalism has been linked with racism here in America to all but ensure the ongoing financial disadvantage of people of color and other low-income, maybe they're white and other, persons. With the ending of legalized slavery in 1863, it may have appeared that the nation was course-correcting and ending racism, ending the practice of denying freedom and opportunity to persons whose hands literally helped build this nation. But what wasn't fully appreciated in 1863, 160 years ago, was that ending slavery wouldn't end racism because it had been structurally embedded in our society from the very beginning with the taking of land from the Native Americans and with the declaration in the Constitution that enslaved persons were not whole beings, but rather 3/5 of a person for population counting for political means. These were the beginnings of structural racism. Structural racism, broadly defined, refers to the laws and systems that make legal and enable institutional racism in the form of rules, practices, and customs, which in turn produce or cause to occur inequity, disparity, and discrimination for Black, Indigenous, and other persons of color. After slavery was abolished and even after the Constitution was amended to remove the 3/5 clause, the institutional practice and custom of denying Black persons whose status with the full rights guaranteed under the Constitution, that was embedded in American culture. The GI Bill, some of you may know and understand and appreciate this, but for those who don't, the GI Bill, passed 80 years after slavery was legally ended, provided one of the most demonstrative examples of structural and institutional racism. The GI Bill provided payments of tuition for college and other schools and low-cost, low-interest mortgages to U.S. military veterans following World War II. But only some were able to take advantage of it because it buttressed discrimination. Colleges that legally at the time discriminated by denying admission to Black persons still received tuition payments. And legal discrimination in housing and home purchasing ensured that Black persons couldn't purchase homes in many communities. Additionally, due to redlining, as the mayor and I were talking about earlier, due to redlining, many of the homes Blacks could purchase were deemed poor financial risks, and banks were less likely to approve their loan applications or would charge higher interest rates. The long-term discriminatory and disparate impact of the GI Bill was foreseeable. Legislators knew, or should have known, that it was racist in design, implementation, and impact. Whereas white veterans were able to buy homes, often in affluent or up-and-coming neighborhoods with little to no money, and to go to college and to schools, other schools, without any barriers at little to no cost. And in so doing, unlock the greatest contributors to income and wealth generation in America, higher education, and home ownership. Blacks could not take equal advantage of the benefits. Blacks were legally barred from attending many colleges and universities and other schools, and thereby denied a free education that could have increased their earnings. Redlining stifled Black families' wealth growth by diminishing the value of the homes they could purchase. White veterans grew income and equity, and in turn poured their returns into their families, setting their children up for their futures. They used the equity in their homes to fund their children's education and passed the wealth acquired in their homes onto their children. Blacks weren't able to do the same at the same rate. And this is why, in great part, 80 years since the GI Bill took effect, Blacks still struggle disproportionately with higher student loan debt and low home ownership, which again are the greatest detractor and the greatest contributor to wealth. This is structural and institutional racism. Another example, structural laws created harsher sentences for Black drug offenders. One of the most incredulous examples Up until 2010, punishment for offenses of 1 ounce of crack cocaine were the same as for 100 ounces of powder cocaine. Who was more likely to be able to purchase 100 ounces of powder cocaine? Who was buying 1 ounce of crack cocaine? Under these sentencing laws, which were only changed, again, a decade ago, hundreds of thousands of blacks were sent to prison for as many as 25 years, often serving as much time in prison for nonviolent offenses as whites did for violent offenses. And then who, when released many years later, was disproportionately denied job opportunities and housing, and who was disenfranchised, kept from voting, and which families then had to depend on one adult for income, to rely on the black woman's income, which, as I shared earlier, on average doesn't equal a white man's income, even if she's more educated. Again, structural and institutional racism by design, by implementation, by impact. A third example, rarely talked about, but I really need you to listen to this one, because I'm about to do something about this one. I'm on this one. The federal poverty level. The official measure used to help set wages and inform policies around who's entitled to child care supports, transportation, housing supports, income supports, Pell Grants, and other loans by the government. The federal poverty level for a family of 4, 2 adults and 2 children, living anywhere in the United States today is just $28,000. Where in the U.S. can any one person, let alone a family of 4, live on an income of just $28,000? Where can anyone buy food, buy a car, pay a car note, pay for gas, child care, health care costs, rent, or have a mortgage for just $28,000? For a family of 3, it's just $22,000. Where can that happen? Let me explain to you how this works. You with me? Does anybody know what the federal the federal minimum wage is? $7.25. When annualized, if an individual works full-time at $7.25, when annualized, that's $15,000. So if you've got 2 adults and 2 children, those 2 adults working full-time, $15,000 times 2, $30,000. Oh, it's magic. They're not poor. So the federal poverty level justifies this nation's federal minimum wage of $7.25. When Dr. King marched on Washington in 1963, he demanded that the minimum wage then, which was $1.25, be moved to $2 and then indexed to inflation. If he'd achieved that, today the minimum wage would at least be $19 an hour. It's $7.25. For a family of 3, 1 adult and 2 children, it's $22,000. Where can a family live in America? 3 people on $22,000. In the city that I come from, in New York City, a family of 3, to just make ends meet, it has been calculated we need at least $95,000 for 1 adult and 2 children. But the federal government says you're not poor if you're making $22,000. By setting the federal poverty level so low, the federal government is able to suppress wages and wage increases, and to suppress critical income supports for food, housing, childcare, transportation, Medicaid, and more, and ultimately to undercount poverty and need. Now, this has significant racial implications because it's persons of color, as I shared, who experience pay inequity and deprivation disproportionately. The result, as we saw with COVID, is that most black and brown families can't make ends meet or save for a rainy day. They don't have enough income after bills to save for college for their children, so they are saddled. Their children are saddled with student debt. They don't have enough to save for a home and build equity and wealth. 50% of black Americans are rent burdened. And the ultimate result, the impact that is the most devastating. Today, nearly 1 in 3 black children lives in poverty, compared to less than 1 in 10 white children, with childhood poverty being a proven determinant of economic insecurity in adulthood. This is how structural and institutional racism works. As my father put it ever so succinctly in his book, God in the Ghetto, which was first published in 1979 and then re-released, I re-released it in 2021. He put it this way: 116 years, now 160 years, since the ending of slavery, blacks have freedom without finance and access without assets, which is tantamount to existence without equity. So what to do? What can we do about it? Racism is structural and institutional, and dismantling an entrenched racist and oppressive system that we've all been birthed into. We didn't create it. We've been birthed into it, shaped and molded by it. To dismantle this system is going to take all of us. In New York City, as Cindy talked about, we're doing something about this. Something never done before, never done anywhere in the nation. We're changing the structural foundation of New York City government. We're changing the structure that has allowed for racism to persist. In 2020, in the aftermath of the killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others, hundreds of thousands of persons took to the streets. Perhaps some of you took to the streets, calling for the prosecution of the officers who killed Floyd and killed Taylor, and for substantial changes in laws and practices and policies that could greatly reduce the use of excessive force and unbridled power against black people. Often there were more white persons marching than persons of color, more white persons protesting and publicly demanding change. Like many, I was so encouraged to see so many non-black persons chanting and carrying signs that read, "Black Lives Matter." And yet, I couldn't help but think, Black Lives Matter, but how much? For most, joining the call to end systemic racism in policing costs very little, relatively little. It takes nothing from their daily living, and it doesn't threaten their access to the resources that for generations have helped ensure their present and future privilege. But what if those same persons were called upon to undo systemic racism in all facets of American life, resulting in the loss of their privilege? I couldn't help but wonder, would they be as quick to protest? Think about it. What if those of us with privilege, and yes, there are black people who have privilege as well, a different type of privilege, but what if ending structural racism meant that maybe I now wouldn't have privilege when it came to education for my children, or the best health care possible, or, priority when it came to housing situations? Would I be so quick to protest? Something to think about, yes? I'm not going to do like they do in church. Raise your hands if that's an issue for you. Just want you to think about it. Our nation will never end will never root out racism in education, in healthcare, in banking, in finance, private sector business, government, and nonprofits, until those who've benefited inequitably join in the call for an end to systemic practices that perpetuate it. That's what we're seeking to do in New York City, to root out racism in the systems that perpetuate it. So here's what happened. This past November, the New York Racial Justice Commission, which I was blessed, privileged, honored to chair, put racial justice on the New York City election ballot. Had never been done before in this nation. New Yorkers were given the opportunity to vote on 3 proposals that would change the city's constitution to mandate and hold the city of New York accountable going forward, not just for one administration or the next, but going forward in perpetuity. Hold the city accountable for ensuring that every resident has access to quality education, health care, fair, livable, and equitable wages, and supports to not only get by, but get ahead. The New York City electorate voted on 3 charter revision proposals. The first, a preamble. First thing I realized when I looked at the charter, which was more than 900 pages long, I studied it. Those law days came in handy. I just kept going through it, those law school days. The preamble, I should say the Constitution, the charter didn't have a preamble. Now, I'm a child of the church, a child of faith. The Bible says, where there is no vision, the people perish. A preamble is a vision. It sets forth values and beliefs about what should be. We realized we didn't have a preamble. So the people who've been running government were just kind of, freestyling, floating, whatever they wanted to do. They weren't beholden to any set of values. We decided there should be a preamble that did 2 things. First, acknowledged the harms, the atrocities that had been visited in New York City upon people of color, beginning with indigenous persons, the Lenape people. Call out the harms, because as my therapist told me years ago, if we don't acknowledge a problem, we can't do anything about it, right? If you deny, you're not going to deal with it. We had to acknowledge the problem. And then the second thing that it did was it says, we are a multiracial democracy where everybody, regardless of how they identify, based on race, religion, ethnicity, who they love, where they come from, is entitled to all that this city can offer. So we acknowledged the harm and we casted a vision. And you know what? New Yorkers showed up. Many people said, what's the value of a preamble? It doesn't have any teeth. It just, it says what you aspire to. The largest number of people flipped the ballot and voted for the first time in New York City. And 70% voted for the preamble. Thank you. The second proposal, to create a mayoral office of racial equity in perpetuity. Not by executive order, where the next mayor could come in and flip it and do something different, but by constitutional mandate, a charter mandate, to have, just like we have a police department, a fire department, we have a social services department, a Department of Education, an office of racial equity that is responsible for developing every 2 years a citywide comprehensive plan for addressing racial inequity, agency by agency, and for producing in the off years a report that shows the level of accountability and that allows for and provides for that we're not just trying to bring certain communities and people just up a notch or 2, but holding them to the highest standards. Looking at our most affluent communities and all that they have with respect to healthcare and education, housing, transportation, and holding the city accountable for bringing every other community on up to that. And we put in place an ongoing commission comprised of the people, by the people, for the people, to be the checks and balances on the mayor's office. That proposal passed by 70%. And the third proposal, sometimes I get a little silly and a little giddy about this one, now mandates that the city of New York calculate annually the true cost of living. Because we know that that's going to help inform government policy and programs, fiscal policy, fiscal spending. It's going to help determine wage setting and supports for critical income needs. We know, the unions knew, that that is going to be a good negotiating point when it comes to working with government. It's going to inform the private sector, because now we're going to have individuals who know what it costs to live here. They've got data. What you're paying me doesn't cut it. 82% of New Yorkers saw that on the ballot and said, let's go. I'm talking about progressives and conservatives said, let's go. Let's do this. So we've now got a true cost of living measure. Can I share with you that when I reached out and talked with the White House about this measure, and I told them it was on the ballot, their eyes were popping out of their heads. You got that on the ballot? Because they know that's a game changer. And so now I'm using that, and I'm going to the White House, and we're going to change the federal poverty measure. So here's the deal. Now what we're doing is we're implementing these measures. Just 2 days ago, our mayor announced that an advisory board has been set up. I'm blessed to serve on it. It is comprised of people who, over the course of the last probably 30, 40 years, have been engaged in structural change in New York City, because we realize we can put these into the charter. But if we don't have people who know how to build structures that are sustainable, then these proposals are going to be like, strategic plans that just sit on the shelf. So now we're going to do the work of implementing these changes, and I'm really, really excited about it. What I want you to appreciate is that what I've come to understand is that, this is as somebody who is a policy expert who has spent 30 years of her career doing policy work. You can't program and policy your way out of structural racism. You just can't. Policies and programs will help. Some individuals may get ahead, but if you don't change the structures that allow for racism to persist, for sexism and misogyny to persist, for biases against persons based on immigration, who they love, how they show up in the world, if you don't change those structures, people are going to figure out how to get around them. We tried to legislate our way out of racism. Clearly, it didn't work. We've had policies and programs, again, that have helped some, but not all. We've got to change the structures. Essentially, what I'm talking about is, we have a foundation in America that is flawed. Well, if you build policies and programs on a structure that's flawed, then they too will prove to be futile in effort. You got a house. If the foundation's cracked, at some point that house is going to sink. You've got to go in and change the foundation. I'll tell you that years ago, when Cindy mentioned my book, Consider Pure Joy. It's a book that Ward and Cindy both read, and they were so kind in putting a review on Amazon about it, just like kind of blowing it up and making it sound really good. Thank you. The book chronicles my journey with a life-threatening illness. I had an environmentally caused leukemia. I woke up on a Friday with a flu-like fever, and the next Friday I was in a coma and intubated, and the doctors told my husband I was going to die 2 days later. I wound up surviving with a chemotherapy cocktail, only to come out of the coma and learn that I needed a bone marrow transplant to cure me of the disease. The doctors told me that I could receive chemo a few more times, but it was only going to treat the cancer. And at a certain point, the potency and the effectiveness of the chemo would wane, and the cancer would come back and kill me. The chemo was a treatment, but it was not a cure. I needed to have the cure, a bone marrow transplant. I got a transplant, and I've now been 13 years cancer-free. Tremendous, a blessing. I share that because in many ways for me, it is analogous to what is happening with racism in America. We keep trying to treat it with policies and with programs. Maybe we just put a little bit more money into this program, or we do a little bit more over here. But we're not trying to cure it. To cure it, we have to go into the structure. They had to wipe out my defunct blood and bone marrow system and give me a new blood and bone marrow system. We've got to go in to our city's foundational laws and dismantle, take out the root of the problem, and develop a cure, changing the structural foundations. It can be done. We proved it can be done at the city level. It can be done here, it can be done anywhere, if you have people who are willing to say, these harms have been intentional. They've been structural. We can do something about it, but we've got to go into the root and tackle the root and dismantle it. Last thing I'll share with you is that as I'm doing this work, people kept telling me there's no point to it. Oh, it's just going to be the same thing. And I kept thinking to myself, at least I got to try. One of my mentors, woman who I greatly respect, when I sat down and shared with her that we were about to introduce these 3 proposals to the New York City electorate, she looked me dead in my eyes and she said, "You know you could fail." I didn't have any response immediately. So I guess she thought that maybe I hadn't heard her, even though she was boldly declaring it. She said it again. "You know you could fail." I looked back at her and I said, if I do what I believe that I am purposed to do, I will not have failed. Now, if New York City, if New Yorkers, having read these proposals, determine not to vote them out, change the charter, they will have failed. But me, I'm going to be good. Thankfully, I'm good, and New York City's good. And with people like yourselves, we all can be good. The nation can be good. Thank you for listening to me. You don't have to stand.
Everybody, that was fantastic, wasn't it? If we have some questions, I would love to pass the mic around. So if anybody has any questions, let us know. I see a question in the back of the room here. I'm heading that way. In the meantime, hopefully they'll be coming out with coffee, and we have these wonderful cupcakes in the middle of the table that I hope you'll enjoy. Okay,
Hi, Jennifer. My question is actually 2 on the ballot initiatives that you had. One, Did you have a budget to promote and try to educate people, and what was that budget like? And what was voter turnout in the election?
So here's the really exciting thing. We did not have a citywide mayoral public advocate. Um, what else we had? We didn't have a gubernatorial election. So in the years where you don't have citywide or statewide elections, actually we did have the gubernatorial, but we didn't have candidates that people were excited about. What often happens in those instances is that voter turnout is very low. The beautiful thing was that with charter revision proposals, we only needed one more vote than one fewer vote. So I was like, okay, look, I just need one. Like every vote matters. What happened though was that we took to social media, we went to community-based organizations, we went to social organizations, and they helped us get out the vote. And we actually had more people voting in this cycle than in the mayoral election the year before. What often happens is the charter revision proposals are on the back of the ballot. Most often in New York City, unlike California where people are used to propositions, we don't have them every year. So flipping the ballot is usually the number is about 15% of the people flip the ballot. We had 73% of people who voted flip the ballot.
Woohoo!
We only had, in trying to reach 8 million New Yorkers, $2 million. But what we did was we used social media and grassroots community institutions to get the word out. The last thing I'll share with you that just touched my heart so deeply, well, two things. On the day of the election, I moved about to the different boroughs. There are 5 boroughs, 5 small cities within the big city. One of the things that really just jolted me was when I went to the Bronx, heavily concentrated with people of color. Um, as I stood out and tried to encourage people to vote, there were a lot of men who would say to me, I'm a convicted felon. I can't vote. I was stunned by that because they so freely shared that information. Most people hesitate to say that they are a convicted felon. But because of the prevalence, the over-surveillance, arrest rates, high incarceration rates in communities of color, it's like a non-issue. It's like, like it is what it is. So they were very comfortable sharing that. The flip was when a young black man told me that it gave him such joy, excitement, when he voted to flip that ballot and to see himself represented for the first time. People of color have never been represented in any constitution, charter, city, state, federal. And now in New York City, people of color are represented in the Constitution. Kind of cool. Hi.
I'm curious. Got to go close. Okay. Um, I'm curious about your comments about minimum wage when it comes to food service and other service professions, which were purposely exempted from the federal laws setting up minimum wage.
When you say food service, are you talking about like food? Like you're talking about like restaurants and things of that nature?
Yes.
Because of the tip issue?
Yes. I mean, I was one of those people in my youth
Yeah.
who worked for $1 an hour because there was no
It's
there was no
problematic.
minimum wage.
It's
So,
extremely problematic, and I'll share why. And our current living is a great example. With inflation so high, many people who are going out to eat are still enjoying, a night out, an afternoon. But there are many people who aren't tipping. or tipping at the levels that they once tipped at because they don't themselves have the money, right? So they're stretching to have a night out or an afternoon out. So they're getting their time, they're getting what they want. But people who are reliant upon tips now struggle all the more. I do believe that at a minimum, that the minimum wage should apply to people who are working in food service industries at a minimum, at a minimum. But I think we need to be tipping as well. Just think about, for some of us, like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, a tip jar, when you bought a cup of coffee, like, what was that? Like, where'd that come from? But it's a reflection of what is happening. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for this very inspiring and empowering talk. Um, we do need to change our structures, but it's impossible to change all of the structures all at once. What would you recommend from a city level that would be the most important changes that need to happen to then keep changing all the other structures in place? Thank you.
So one of the greatest lessons that I learned from my father, um, as was shared, my father was president of the New York chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference when King was president of the national body. My dad was president of the economic justice arm of the SCLC that some people don't know about. The economic justice arm was Operation Breadbasket, and it focused on economic injustice. Many people think that the civil rights movement was all about access to places of public accommodation, voting rights, education, equity, equality, and that was it. People don't often remember that the March on Washington was the March on Washington for jobs and freedom. It was always about economic justice. My dad taught me early on that when we think that we are fighting racism as though it's an end in itself, we've got it wrong. Racism has proven to be the most effective tool for upholding an unjust capitalist society. And so what we have to do is to figure out, remember, in this nation, money is power and power is money. We have to work at every level to center on economic injustice. That's why I'm so centered on the federal poverty measure. That's why, when I did the work with the city, I made sure that true cost of living was a charter mandate revision. Doing the same thing now at the state level. But how we measure cost of living is the key to beginning to change a lot of these injustices. Because if you're going to tell me that as a family of four, I have two children, they're grown now, and thank God one of them has a job, and the other one's in college, right? But if you were to tell me that $28,000 was enough for me to care for two children, my husband and me, that is so bogus. But the federal government has been getting away with it for years. And it allows them to then not provide a solid federal minimum wage. And while states and localities can change their minimum wages, they get to relate it back to this subpar, woefully suppressed federal minimum wage. We've got to demand that true costs be calculated, because only then, as the therapist said, when you acknowledge the problem, will you do something about it? So focus on the economic pieces.
I'm incredibly inspired by what you talked about tonight, and I think it's amazing what you're doing in New York. And I think in order for you to get to the White House and realize this unpacking of the foundation and recreating it, it has to be grassroots all over the nation. So my question for you is how? How do we have a toolkit that can be recreated all over the nation, coast to coast, that makes it not even a discussion at the White House? How do we move it here in Marin, in a room full of people that can make change? How do we do it here?
So it first begins with everybody understanding what we're talking about, right? So first, I mean, I spent a little bit of time, quite a bit of time, just unpacking structural racism. Because many of us think, oh, we know what this is, but we need examples to really bring it home. You know, I'm just going to go out here with you all, and I don't know where you all on this, but structural racism is critical race theory. That's it in a nutshell. The examples I provided you are examples of critical race theory, right? Those who had power theorized if we do X, Y, and Z, then 1, 2, and 3 would result. And sure enough, they did X, Y, and Z, and 1, 2, and 3 resulted. So first, knowledge and education is critical. And it's not just like at the national level, but it's understanding what it looks like in your communities. So often, I don't want to get too policy wonkish. We don't do what is termed root cause analysis. We see a problem and now we've got the solution for it. We know exactly what needs to be done. But we don't look at, well, what is the root cause of that problem? And the underlying root cause and the underlying root cause. So in your communities, you have to look at your most significant challenges and problems. And then, I mean, I could say a toolkit, but you have to look for yourselves at, well, what are our biggest issues? And then it's like you have to do that analysis. What is the genesis of them? They didn't just happen, especially when it's tied to racism, sexism, misogyny, immigration, and the like. So you've got to do that work. But the other thing that I'll share with you is that there are some common problems like economic injustice. And so you can attach that way. Now, out here, some of you familiar with Policy Link? Michael McAfee? He's my ride or die. So Michael McAfee was a constant support for the Racial Justice Commission work. I have tagged him now to work with. He's a part of the steering committee to take on the federal government for true cost of living and federal poverty measure reform. And he's also now working, tapped him again, he's going to be on the mayor's advisory here in New York City to help us ensure that we create the structures for these charter revisions to live. I share that because we have here in your very close community, you have in Oakland, Policy Link that is doing this work. And attaching to them and figuring out what you can do in your respective community and how you can learn from them would be very helpful. I love Michael because he says, look, some of y'all are in the business of relief work, and some of us are going to be liberators. So you go be a reliever, I'm going to be a liberator. I talk about it, I was sharing with somebody earlier, I talk about it as being there's poverty management and there's poverty eradication. So some of us have to manage the problems that are presenting. You know, help make sure that people have food and housing and shelter and clothing for the night. And some of us are going to undo those structures that make those supports necessary in the first place. I also call it charity versus justice. Some of us are doing charity work, but charity work is not going to solve the problem. You've got to do justice work.
Yeah, it feels a little strange to be talking to you in a mic since I'm sitting right here. But I will say I know a lot of people are worried about like critical race being banned out of classrooms, and I'm very happy to say that we are learning about it in our high schools. So don't worry, we're set there. But my question was, so a lot of people in our country cannot vote. People are undocumented. People are under the age of 18. People are felons. How do you engage those people in solving and addressing these issues?
So The challenges that present there are that not everybody, I'm just going to put out here, not everybody who is a moderate or progressive wants all the people who you've just mentioned who fall into those categories to vote, right? We are not a monolith. People have a range of ideas, values, philosophies, ideals, and beliefs. What we can do is, again, educate and advocate for those who are left out, for those who are marginalized. And they can march. Here's the deal. When you march, right, or when you rally, nobody knows your, felon status. Nobody knows your immigration status. But elected officials see numbers. And numbers matter. The reason that the 1964 Civil Rights Act passed in great measure was because, the elected leaders looked out of their windows in Washington, D.C., and saw that more than 200,000 people had gathered. They had a problem. They had to do something about it. We still live in a nation where people, even though decisions may be made when people get into office that are counter to what maybe people desire and want, the masses, we still live in a nation where if you speak up and you speak up in mass, those who are afraid about holding on to their seats will pay attention. The problem is we have actually lost that sense of power. Many people have fallen into, well, it doesn't really make a difference. It actually does. You just have to show up in mass. But the other thing I would say is helping to educate people on what they can do, and then be the one who presses for those changes that allows them to have voice. Absolutely.
Any more questions out there? Oh.
Hello, Andrea Henderson. It's so nice to meet you, and thank you so much for being here. I feel like I have to offer this context before I ask the question because it may be seen as controversial. I work with her. She's like, shut up. So my husband is Black and Filipino, and I am a white and Asian woman. We are unicorns here in Marin, being successful individuals, living very well for ourselves, and I'm thankful for that. My husband, I am his second wife. He was a young father, did not finish college, did that afterwards, and got his MBA. And I think in a lot of his approach has been to keep his head down, even within the current construct. And he rose to success. And so, and I have in similar ways for that reason. And I think if we are able to change the structural construct that is negative, and more equity is involved in terms of the haves versus have-nots, which if we took race and all those things out of it, that's what it comes down to. And more people of color, more women, more LGBTQIA rise to a place where they feel successful. At what point do we then turn to individuals and say personal accountability becomes your responsibility to succeed? And I would love, because we can only legislate our way out of so much, and I would love to get your perspective on how we handle that.
So, really appreciate the question and the context, and frankly, the point that you're making. Personal responsibility plays a critical role, a significant role. But when you live in a society where despite personal responsibility, many can't get ahead, you have to do both and. Just recently, I was in a conversation with a very prominent faith leader, an internationally renowned faith leader. We were talking about this very issue. And he said to me, Jennifer, he said, what's the thing that we need to be focused on? And I said, structural economic deprivation. He looked back at me and he said, structural economic deprivation. He looked at me and he said, you think that's a problem? I said, yeah, I do. He said to me, well, if structural economic deprivation is the problem, how do you explain natural disasters? So I looked at him like, what are you talking about? And he said, working class family. They work hard, work full time, they buy a house, tornado hits, there's a flood, hurricane. The house is knocked down and they lose everything. How is that structural economic deprivation? Say easily. Why is it that a working class family does not have the resources to save to be able to weather an economic storm? Why is it that working class families in the main are living, residing in spaces and places that are more subjected to natural disasters? Because the wages in this nation are not ensuring that they can weather an economic storm. That's structural economic deprivation. He looked at me like, oh, Lord. He said to me, I'll never forget it. This is a man who tells people that he mentored me, whatever. He said to me, he said, oh, I see I need to bring you up. Take your thinking to a higher level. I was like, okay. He said, what about personal responsibility? I said, I'll show you what personal responsibility looks like in a world where we have structural economic deprivation. The black woman, as I shared, is the most educated group, black women, in our society. And yet, she's earning 64 cents on average to what a white man earns. She has higher student debt, getting that college degree and that graduate degree because she comes from a black family, because of redlining and other, was not able to take equity out of the house and pay for her college education. Oh, and may I add that because of a lot of other social ills, in the great majority of black families, she is not only the primary breadwinner, she is the sole breadwinner. So now her income has to stretch. She's got to pay for her rent. She's got to pay her student loans. She's not making with a master's degree what a white man with an associate degree earns. And her children are growing up in poverty. That is personal responsibility with structural economic deprivation. Yes, there are going to be people who break through and get ahead. But en masse, that's not going to happen. So hear me, all of you. I'm so glad you asked and you presented that. Nobody who is doing this work, who's sincere and intentional about it, is saying that personal responsibility plays no role. What we are saying is when you stack the deck against people who, despite their best efforts, cannot get ahead, you have to be held accountable for it. Yes, some people are going to get through. But en masse, it has been shown, and just something for you all to pay attention to, the research is now out showing that even in affluent families of color, because of structural economic deprivation and structural racism, the likelihood that children of affluent families of color are going to do as well as their parents is virtually non-existent. Well, how is that? They did the work. They got ahead because the system is designed to work the way that it does. General Counsel to Bishop Desmond Tutu for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission admonished me when I first began this work to be ever mindful that the people who created the system will do all they can the people who work and benefit from it, to uphold it. Be ever mindful of that. And the few of us who get through, we better not for a moment think that it's because we were extra special or extraordinary. Not at all. Lucky. And so it's the responsibility of us to understand the two go hand in hand. They have to. Because even, we still, well, I don't even want to get into it. I'll leave it alone. Let's take another call. I got another call. I'm on the radio and on TV all the time, and we're like, let's go to call. Let's take another, but thank you.
I was wondering if you've heard of a tactic, and might it someday be something that could be done in New York, charter or otherwise, called citizen assembly by lottery. And what that is kind of think of it as like jury duty. You get your letter in the mail, and through random sample, you're bringing together 100 citizens of New York. And if it's random, there's going to be good representation, including of felons and ex-cons and blacks and regular people. And they are empowered to take up an issue, a complex issue of public importance, research it, have some resources, and eventually make a recommendation that, if it's set up, has a tie-in to the elected process, where the elected officials have to hear it, have to vote on it. The city of Paris in the past year has just set this up. And those of us have probably heard more about Ireland. You know, Ireland, when they voted on this Catholic country, voted on legalizing abortion, legalizing gay marriage, it came out of a process, which was a many-month process of 100 people, but it was actually 2/3 normal citizens, 1/3 elected officials, and often regular people will come up with solutions or recommendations that the political process wouldn't. So I don't.
I had not heard of that specifically, but we do have civic engagement when it comes to budgeting.
Participatory budgeting.
Participatory budgeting.
That's a cousin.
Right, and we also, right. And the other thing that we've done as part of the racial justice work, I mentioned that we're going to have a commission comprised of the people, by the people, for the people. And that commission has to be comprised of persons of the community, not elected officials, representative of New York, diversity in every respect. And then they are going to, unlike most other commissions, they will be given stipends to participate in the process. You know, our city planning commission, people get like $80,000 a year, when most of them are already making $500,000 a year. But most of our other boards, you don't get paid. Well, we're going to pay the community to be part of the process. They will be staffed and will have analytics and a budget to do the work and put forth recommendations.
Very good.
So somewhat along the line of what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to talk more about it. There are people working on trying to get these set up around the country.
Thank you all for listening to me. Thanks for having me. I've had a great time, and if you see me on some random weekend walking around Sausalito, blame Cindy.
Thank you, everyone, for coming tonight. Wasn't this a wonderful occasion? It really was. So great to be able to gather in person. So before you leave, if you look under your teacup, and I think a lot of people have left already, we have a gift for you to take home tonight. And I hope you have the star under your teacup. So please take a look. And yeah, we got a winner over here. So when you go, Linda, are we doing that on the way out? Is that what we're doing, collecting the gifts on the way out? Yes. And Jen, we have one for you here too. Thank you. So, and if we have people who left, and you got it, you get the gift on the way out. So again, thank you everyone for coming. Glad you could make it.